welcome everyone to the BIOMES seminar. I'm Eli Fenishal, I'm a professor here in the school. It is really my great honor to actually be fulfilling one of the things I decided I needed to do while I was away from Yale at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and that was get my colleague Gretchen Goldman to come here and speak to all of us, because I think just what she does is super cool and all of you will love it. Gretchen started her professional life with a BS in atmospheric science from Cornell, with a PhD in environmental engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology. She is currently the Climate Change Research and Technology Director at the U.S. Department of Transportation and co-director of the DOT Climate Change Center. I got to know Gretchen in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where she had the longest title ever, which was Assistant Director for Environmental Science, Engineering, Policy, and Justice. And she says in her bio that she led federal efforts on scientific integrity, indigenous knowledge, climate inequity, air quality, and environmental justice. What I can tell you is she was the driving force in the White House behind indigenous knowledge, environmental justice, and scientific integrity. She was previously a research director at the Center for Science and Democracy at the Union of Concerned Scientists. She has been on the board of 500 Women Scientists. She's chaired the Air and Climate Public Advisory Committee for the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. She has been recognized by her alma mater, Georgia Tech's Alumni 40 Under 40, which made me feel especially old when she won that award when we were working together. She's been named she was named in Glamour Magazine's Women of the Year in 2020. And most importantly, she helped me get oriented at the White House when I got there. We joined, I think, about a week apart. And basically we're told to figure this place out together. There's no operating manual. The other thing that I will say about Gretchen is following I'm going to give you all some advice for her talk today, which is the advice she always gave me, which was write a tweet. And so you can tweet at Gretchen TG. And I guess it's not tweeting anymore, but
well, thank you so much, Eli. That is right in terms of the White House not having an operating manual and are having to figure it out together. And it was really an honor to work with Eli, and we could compare notes and learn from each other. And you'll hear a little bit of some of the work that I did there in this talk, as well as some other work. And so I'd like to get started with some of that thinking and some of that experience that I've had and how that plays into my thinking about my current role in looking at climate change and environmental justice and the transportation system. So first, I'd like to start off with what my background is and thinking about that perspective of approaching this issue. And so, as Eli noted, I started off as at the Union of Concerned Scientists doing science policy from a nonprofit public interest perspective. I did that for a decade or so, and then spent 2 years in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, carrying on a lot of that same kinds of topics, but from the White House perspective. And then I ended, and I'm now at U.S. Department of Transportation, doing a lot of the implementation side of thinking about these issues and what does it look like on the ground to do it from a federal agency's perspective. And so I wanted to talk about that history and talk about, use that as a vehicle to talk about the current state of where we are when it comes to climate and environmental justice, science, and policy in the US right now. So I'm going to do that through talking about it from the lens of these different parts of my career. So if we start off, I'm going to call it building the vision. So thinking about what was the current state of things, what's the problem that we need to solve, where are the issues and where are the solutions. And then I'll talk through setting the course. So what did it look like from the White House perspective to say, what do we do about these overarching problems? How do we start to shift things in a new way to start to tackle the climate crisis and address these problems in bigger ways? And then now I'll call this last phase is making it happen. So what does that look like to do that implementation of that policy from a federal agency's perspective, and in my case, from Department of Transportation. So those are going to be the three elements of this talk. And I wanted to do that both for the students in the room, so you can sort of see the different kinds of career pathways and options and perspectives that you can take in these fields. And then also, I think it works as a nice sort of evolution of how things happen and how progress is made on when we're talking about big, challenging issues and how to tackle them. So first, if we start off with building the vision, so what was happening, what are the issues, and how do we address it? I probably do not need to say too much to this audience about this, but we are in fact very much already experiencing a warming world, and we're seeing those impacts more and more everywhere, every day. And the more that we learn about the science, the more urgent we see that the problem is that we need to tackle. And this is both in terms of the urgent need to address greenhouse gas emissions in the near term, and do that as soon and as dramatically as we can, as well as bracing ourselves for the impacts. So we're already seeing the impacts of climate change, and that's affecting a lot of our lives, our health, our economy, and many sectors in the United States. And so when we look at specifically at the transportation sector, transportation is a big part of the problem. It's the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. It's responsible for air quality and many other environmental challenges. And it's also the second largest household expenditure and is the main driver of global petroleum demand. And so we see transportation as a huge focal point that we need to address if we want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and do it quickly. And that is, of course, the task that we have in front of us. We are making progress on this front, but we need to make more progress and more progress faster. As one data point, between 2005 and 2021, US greenhouse gas emissions fell by 20%. And that was led largely by reductions in the electric power sector. But we only saw transportation emissions fall by 8% during that same time, and that's inclusive of some of the effects of the pandemic and how that changed travel patterns. And so we really need to continue to dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector and do so in a bigger way than has been happening so far. And so the point I would make on this too is that this is also a big opportunity to have other benefits. If we reduce transportation emissions, we're probably also and can design it such that we're also having a lot of other benefits on society, on quality of life, on safety, on health, because of the connections between transportation emissions and all of these other factors. And at the same time as we need to reduce emissions from the transportation sector, the transportation system itself is vulnerable to impacts of climate change. We see this often, and if you think about it, you might notice that transportation is often the poster child for climate impacts. If you think about headlines and the pictures you see, it's often, right, that broken bridge, that fire over a road, it's people walking through flooded waters. You know, we often see that mobility challenge as being one of the main challenges that happen when there's climate or weather-related disaster that happens. And so with respect to the transportation system, this wreaks a lot of havoc. We often see some sort of whether a climate event or disaster occur. This causes a lot of infrastructure damage and destruction to the infrastructure itself, and can also cost lives and disrupt supply chains. And then we often have to engage in a costly emergency response. And then there's often a longer recovery and rebuilding process. And so this is a cycle that we would want to get out of, right? It costs money, it costs lives, it disrupts a lot of the economy. And so there's this urgent problem as well to make our transportation system more resilient. And this is a lot of information, but the piece that I want you to pull from this is that the impacts of climate change will not be equally distributed. We see a lot of disproportionate impacts on low-income communities, communities of color, and other groups. This is from a 2021 Environmental Protection Agency report that's very good. So it's a good one to check out if you're interested in this issue. But the bottom line is that we can think of climate change as a factor that is going to exacerbate a lot of existing inequities when it comes to the environment and other social elements. So we see this again and again in the data when we're looking at different impacts, different kinds of issues, and of course things are not they're not unrelated. And all of this, none of this is a coincidence because there's actually been a decades-long fight for environmental justice in this country that has gone on for a long time. So this is one of the earlier environmental justice events that occurred. This is a strike at the Memphis Sanitation in 1968. So the environmental justice movement came out of the broader civil rights movement, where there was beginning to be a recognition that there were also large disparities in who got access to a clean and healthy environment. And so that grew out of that movement and was bolstered in the decades later with more quantitative data and reports that really showed that there were systemic issues and systemic inequities in who was exposed to pollution and who had a safe and healthy environment. And so it was out of that long continued fight for environmental justice that we see the current moment, because that was an issue that many communities have been working on this for decades and working to address these inequities in bigger ways. But it often was not a mainstream issue taken, or it wasn't as centrally considered by many decision makers in many levels of the government and in different places until more recently. So with that, we're going to move on to setting the course. So this is thinking more about what in recent years we've done at the high level to set policy and think about advancing and addressing some of these issues around climate and environmental justice. So an important point I wanted to make about that, the reason to go into that environmental justice history, is to really put in context some of the Biden-Harris administration efforts around environmental justice and just how big of a deal it was for these to be taken on by a White House and be more centrally focused on by a presidential administration. And so early in the Biden administration, President Biden issued Executive Order 14008, which launched, among other things, the Justice 40 initiative, which is a landmark initiative of the administration that is focused on ensuring that at least 40% of the climate and clean energy investments that are made across the federal government go to disadvantaged communities. So this was a pretty big charge, and it included lots of different elements, and there's currently thousands of people in the federal government implementing Justice 40 in different ways. It included a lot of unique elements. One is sort of inclusion of data and research and thinking about how do we determine who is a disadvantaged community, and it also includes some accountability elements. There was a scorecard for Justice 40 progress that was released this past February, and there's hundreds of programs across the government that are now working toward this goal of 40%. And so really looking to shift resources and focus on the needs of these communities that have been disproportionately burdened with environmental harms for many decades. And these efforts were just recently bolstered again. In April, there was another environmental justice executive order issued by the president. And this time it reaffirms the United States' commitment to environmental justice and also strengthens that commitment through a few different ways. So many might remember there was an original President Clinton's executive order on environmental justice that launched a lot of federal thinking on this. And what this new executive order does is it builds on that and looks at what do we need to make that a reality in bigger ways than it has been, and what are the next steps on it. And so one piece that I wanted to call out that I have been involved in was this new executive order specifically boosts the role of science in thinking about these issues. There's a part of this executive order that really focuses on what do we need to do to bring science and data and research to inform environmental justice decision-making across the federal government. And so specifically what that one looks like is Section 5 of that executive order includes a need to develop a environmental justice science data and research plan to look at gaps in what do we need, what do we not know? Is this an issue of not having the data and the research? Is it, are there places we need to get it into decision-making, getting it into the hands of the people that are making different kinds of decisions in the government? And so really to look at what does that look like, and how do we make progress in leveraging that huge federal research enterprise towards environmental justice decision-making? What are the opportunities there? And so I wanted to focus on this piece as this is a part that I work on, and it's near and dear to my heart. But also because we currently have a request for information out on this task. And so this is our interagency committee that's focused on this and trying to tackle this issue. But I want to call it out because this is open through December 12th, where we're taking input on what should it look like to have a plan and have a federal strategy around environmental justice and science data and research. So this is a big opportunity because I think the executive order lays out a lot of issues of what that plan needs to include and what are the specific things it needs to tackle. But even within that, there's a lot of opportunity for us to think about what should it look like? Where are the places where we can really make progress? Is there low-hanging fruit? Are there places that we know we need that better connection between the science and the decision-making? And what are the next steps, and how do we start to fill those gaps? And so another piece that I wanted to briefly mention was the work around Indigenous knowledge that you heard Eli mention at the top. And so this was a good example, I thought, of the White House thinking bigger and bolder about different ways of advancing this work. And so when it comes to climate and environmental issues, we know that there's a lot that Indigenous people have to bring to the table, and there's a lot of knowledge and places that we can really do more to include everyone in what we're thinking about, and really leverage those contributions to make sure that we're better off as a nation to address climate and environmental issues more broadly. And so one element of that was this effort to ensure that the federal government better includes Indigenous knowledge in all of its decision-making. And so this was an effort that I helped lead from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. We had a committee that worked on this with representatives from the White House Council on Native American Affairs, as well as representatives from federal agencies, to look at, what should this look like? Where do we need to be doing better in terms of recognizing Indigenous knowledge, in terms of including it in federal decisions, including Indigenous people and tribal nations in federal decisions. And so we really had this opportunity to take this holistic look at, what is the status quo? Where are we doing well? Where are we not doing so well? And how do we advance this? And so we undertook an effort to do that. We did tribal consultations, we did listening sessions, we spoke in different conferences and spaces to really get a handle on what we could do and what would make sense in terms of the role of the federal government. And then we were able to release guidance for the entire federal government on Indigenous knowledge in decision-making. And so this is a document that we released last December. Time is meaningless to me now. But that I think it was last December, and that really set in motion an effort to rethink how we are doing this at different federal agencies. And so there's a White House guidance that agencies are now implementing, and it includes a lot of different aspects of this, including first, just the basic education component, so helping people understand what is Indigenous knowledge, also known as traditional ecological knowledge, in thinking about what is its role and what could it be its role when we're thinking about federal decision making. And so it was both to educate federal employees who may encounter this or may be working with tribal nations or others to think about these issues, and also where are the places within the structures of federal decision making where we could be doing this better. And so this covers a lot of different spaces, from how we handle it in grant making, in research funding, but also rulemaking within the federal government, and large scientific assessments that the government does, and all different parts of kinds of decisions that the government might make, and how we could be doing better on this. And so that's something that agencies are now implementing, and wanted to mention that specifically. And the last big thing I will say about this effort at the White House and how it's advanced a lot of this work is just really to focus on the truly unprecedented level of climate and clean energy and environmental justice and equity investments that are now being made because of actions from the White House and from Congress. So the Inflation Reduction Act is the largest climate investment in history. And then before that, we had the bipartisan infrastructure law, which was a huge once-in-a-generation investment in our nation's infrastructure. And there was also the CHIPS and Science Act, which included historic investments in U.S. manufacturing and industrial policy efforts. And so these are sort of the high-level headlines that you might see on this, but I feel like it just cannot be emphasized enough how huge of a shift that these pieces of legislation have provided for us to advance this issue and really think bigger and bolder and on climate, on environmental justice. I mean, these were just unimaginable levels of investment that I would never have thought of when I was thinking about advocating around climate and environmental justice issues just a few years previous. So I just want to really emphasize how big this is, and especially if you're plugging in and as a student and hadn't been paying attention for decades, this is really truly a big investment that does not happen every year. So and so the way that applies when we're specifically talking about transportation is that the U.S. has committed to net zero greenhouse gas emissions no later than 2050. We're looking at 50 to 52% reductions from 2005 levels in economy-wide net greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and that includes complete decarbonization of the transportation sector. So our leaders, President Biden, Department of Transportation Secretary Buttigieg, really understand that this is an urgent problem and are laser focused on thinking about and working on what we can do about it. So this is the bold goal that they have set forth for us to all consider. And so then the last piece is making it happen. So now that we have all of this direction, all this investment, what does that look like on the implementation side? And I wanted to talk about this specifically because I think this is now my day-to-day, of course, at Department of Transportation, but it's also the part that you tend to hear less about, right? You might hear about signing of bills, things that Congress passes, but you don't hear as much about the implementation side and what does it actually look like to carry out all of these visions, all of these orders and legislation direction, because it's really a huge infrastructure of thousands of people across the government that are thinking about what does this look like on the ground and how do we really make it happen in terms of advancing climate and environmental justice on the ground. So at the Department of Transportation, there's a couple ways that we think about how to carry this out. And I'll say these sorts of levers of change vary at different federal agencies depending on the mission and the scope and the congressional direction given to that federal agency. But at DOT, we have this unique mix of different kinds of levers. So The first is sort of policy and regulations. So what do we really have the authority to direct? But there's also a lot of funding programs. There's a lot of ways we can influence things through giving out funding to either cities, states, metropolitan areas, lots of places that we can allocate that. Providing technical assistance to decision makers on the ground in different areas, and a focus on investments in research and technology. All right, so focusing first on that last piece on research. So I am in the Office of the Secretary in the Research Division, the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Research and Technology. And so here we think we're working really specifically on how are we leveraging research and technology transfer applications to help address some of the bigger goals that the Department of Transportation and the administration have around addressing climate change, furthering equity, advancing safety, and others where we're thinking about how do we really make sure that we have a safe, accessible, reliable, equitable, and sustainable transportation system. And so in the world of transportation, there's a lot of opportunity here. And, you know, we can all see it in our day-to-day. We walk around and, you know, we've seen this just explosion of micromobility and rideshare and other sorts of shared mobility options. And there's lots of different investments that are happening now that really escalating and elevating the kinds of transportation options that we all have every day. And so we do a lot of thinking about what's around the corner, what's next in terms of that technology, and how do we make sure that that's leveraged for to meet these goals. Are we doing things and making sure that it's being leveraged to improve safety, to address climate change, to make sure first we're not doing any further inequities by advancing these technologies, and also to address equity in a bigger way and try to alleviate different kinds of inequities that exist around transportation and mobility restrictions for many. So that's sort of the broader vision that we're carrying out. And then the piece that I'm focused on specifically is launching a U.S. Department of Transportation Climate Change Research and Technology Program. And so really looking to up our game on what does it look like to focus on climate specifically, climate and transportation specifically. And there's this big opportunity here for us to look at what the research and technology applications are. Are we making sure that that's informing decisions making at the Department of Transportation, as well as state DOTs and cities and communities across the country? And are we building those bridges between the science and the policy applications and other kinds of decisions that we know are needed? And so there's this big opportunity for us to think about that bigger and making sure that all those connections are being made. The most sort of immediate way that we've been doing that is through implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law and coordinating across the department around that. And there's also a lot of just internal work that's needed to advance this and all work together. So I co-lead the DOT Climate Change Center, which is this body that looks at across the department. And so we coordinate and advance research and policy across the different, what we call the modes, the modal administrations. So these are the different parts of DOT. So the safety division, the Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit, Federal Rail, Maritime, and so all the different modes of transportation have their own federal agency that's working toward this. And so we can make sure we're all working together, we're elevating each other's work, and we're really advancing this issue across transportation modes. And one particular opportunity I want to call out right now is we have a current funding opportunity out for a climate change and transportation research initiative. So this is in support of a lot of the work I've been talking about and thinking about how can we really do better around when it comes to climate change and transportation. And so that's out now. You can find it at that link, and we're doing a webinar on Friday to talk more about it. And that's the deadline is the end of November. All right, I think I'm okay on time. All right, there's lots of ways that we're advancing this work at the Department of Transportation, but one piece I really wanted to call out and emphasize is the work we're doing around this document, the U.S. National Blueprint for Transportation Decarbonization. And so, as you saw, we're trying to decarbonize the entire transportation sector. So this is a big challenge, and it affects a lot of different elements of our government and of our society. And so we really need to think bigger and try a different thing about how we address this, right? This can't just be a little program that exists at one federal agency. And so the way this was done was, it was actually a partnership between 4 parts of the government, Departments of Transportation and Energy, Housing and Urban Development, and the Environmental Protection Agency. So we're all working together to try to tackle this massive challenge of how do we decarbonize the transportation sector. And it covers every mode of transportation and tries to set this realistic and achievable vision. And it's really focused on trying to think about what can we do within this decade. So how can we really advance this now and not just think about further down in the sort of ultimate more 2050 goals, but what do we need to be doing right now to do better in terms of coordination, in terms of getting work done on the ground. So that's what this document is, and this came out at the start of this year, and we're now very focused on implementing it in different ways. And this is really what's needed for us to make sure we're meeting the president's goals around climate change, as well as the expectations of the Paris Agreement. And so specifically what's in here is 3 different strategies that focuses on convenience, efficiency, and clean transportation technologies. And so we're really trying to look and think bigger about all of these different pieces of how do we decarbonize the transportation system. And one point I'll mention here, that the part that maybe will be most familiar to you when it comes to decarbonizing transportation is electrification, right? Get electric cars, really advancing that, which is absolutely necessary and critical for this work to happen. And it is also not enough. We need to do more if we want to meet these goals. It's not sufficient to just electrify the current fleet and continue with the same amount of transportation patterns and choices that are happening now. So we need to really rethink how we do things, how to create environments where people have other choices that are beyond going alone in a car. And so there's a lot of efforts underway to what this looks like. And we're really focused on thinking about it in a couple different areas. One is this increasing convenience point. So this is really about the Department of Transportation encouraging the development of affordable communities that are safe and walkable and bikeable and are integrated with transit systems. So this is a big opportunity to sort of increase access to job centers and shopping and schools and entertainment and essential services, and creating environments where people have more transportation choices and can more easily choose lower carbon options for transportation. And so that includes a lot of different elements. A lot of it is thinking up to at the design level, and how do we make sure we're focused on fixing the infrastructure we have before we're building new facilities, and also making sure we're really leveraging technology. So to the extent that we have more digital options with work from home and other pathways, are we making sure we're really leveraging that for opportunities? And then another big piece of that blueprint is focused on efficiency. So what this looks like on the passenger side is looking to mode shift. So trying to get what kinds of conditions do we need to get people to take more different kinds of modes of transportation, to take lower carbon options when they're available. And so a lot of thinking about shared mobility and micromobility, and what other options can we create, or how do we encourage that sort of action. On the freight side, this is a lot about optimization and shifting from trucks and rail to maritime, or shifting from trucks to rail and maritime. So thinking about lower carbon freight options, and it's about really optimizing intermodal connections and making sure we're really boosting efficiency when it comes to movement of goods. And so the last piece on that I would just put up, and This is more thinking about what is that efficiency currently when it comes to different kinds of travel. And so I'm not going to talk about this in detail, but I wanted to put it up just to show that there is a lot of opportunity, because we see these big differences between different modes in terms of the carbon emissions. And so what can we do to shift some trips, create more convenient options for people? And so essentially, I think of this as a big opportunity window, because we know that there's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions consequences of different choices. And so what can we do to encourage or make it easier for people and goods movement to choose those lower carbon options? And to bring back the environmental justice piece, I wanted to just flag that in terms of Justice 40 and thinking about this, it's really central to a lot of Department of Transportation programs. We have 39 programs at DOT that fall under this program of focusing on that goal of at least 40% of investments going to disadvantaged communities. And that's totaling $204 billion in terms of what the bipartisan infrastructure law funding is. And so there's really a lot of opportunity here, and we're focused on what that looks like across the department with respect to different programs. And then on the resilient side, there's also these huge opportunities when it comes to transportation, because with the bipartisan infrastructure law and other legislation and other sources of funding, we're always doing a lot of different building and repair on transportation, on our transportation system. That's happening in cities and towns across the country every day. And so every time we do that, that is an opportunity to make sure we're considering climate change and climate impacts, and how do we build infrastructure that will be more resilient and cognizant of what the needs will be, what the needs are now and what the needs will be in the future, where we know there may be or there will be worsening climate impacts in different areas. And so really looking to bridge what we know from the climate science and applications to the engineering side, where people are building on the ground, and what could that look like, and how can we be better in terms of resilience. All right, and so I wanted to end here and just emphasize the significance of this current moment in our nation when it comes to climate and environmental justice and equity considerations, because we really have this unprecedented opportunity in front of us. Early in my career, when I was thinking a lot about this work and how are we possibly going to tackle the climate crisis, I never, ever would have imagined that we'd have this much opportunity, both in terms of policy and the economic changes that have happened and the technology advancements that we've made, and just the tremendous amount of investment and momentum and political will that we're now experiencing when it comes to climate and transportation specifically. And so I just wanted to really emphasize that, especially as for students in the room that are thinking about this. There's just so much opportunity to do this, and I think that we can really advance. We have this huge opportunity to do this, and so no matter where you choose to go after your degree, I think there's a lot you can do. I'm happy to talk about what that looks like at DOT specifically, because I think you do have opportunities, but mostly just want to emphasize that this is a big opportunity to do a lot and make big changes in the world. So I hope you will think big and act bigger in the future. Thanks.
Thanks for the questions.
Hi, thank you so much. I actually have some slightly personal questions, so feel free to decline. But on this notion of thinking big and acting bigger. Well, one, I was wondering, after coming from so many years in the advocacy space, how that transition has been like for you now, being on the other side of things, and if you could talk a little bit about differences in terms of how you conceptualize, your values and what you're doing in your current role. And I'm also curious, thinking about, coming to the end of the current administrative term, there's this sense of like very immense urgency in everything that the federal government is doing currently on climate. And I wonder, like, how do you manage that? Obviously, in a professional role in terms of how you see your role, but also just psychologically. I would love to hear your thoughts on these things.
Yeah. No, those are all good. We could have a longer conversation, but briefly, I'll say, yeah, I mean, it's a good question, right? I sort of think about it as, there's different roles on the spectrum, and you sort of figure out where you best fit in terms of your preferences and your skills and where you are. Because on the outside, outside of government, I felt like a lot of my role was, to imagine ideas and, much like academia, right? So think about what is the opportunity? Can we really frame this? And at least where I was, it was very focused on that science to policy bridge. And so given what we know, what do we know from the science? What does the data tell us? And how do we translate that to policy situations? Because the reality is in policy, it's just really a different beast than thinking about things in a sort of hypothetical context. And so we can come up with good ideas, but at the end of the day, like, especially on this issue with the urgency and wanting to action sooner, we have to think about what sort of fits in the frame of what's possible given all the guardrails around policy. And this is true at all levels, but at the federal level, right, there's lots of constraints in terms of what you can do as an agency, what are meeting all the mandates, and also addressing and making sure we're navigating all of the laws that we know we have to uphold. And so that presents both opportunities and can sort of limit what you can do depending on the issue. And so the way that I sort of thought about it is that now is just this opportunity to do so much, because we have this funding, this opportunity to really advance this in a bigger way from the inside. And it sort of it depends on what's happening in the world, but it felt to me important to carry out that work, because that implementation side effort is so critical. And I think I probably gained a greater appreciation for that now, being on sort of the inside of things. And you really need to carry it through with federal agencies, with working with people on the ground, because often after the bill is signed, cameras can go away, and then there's sort of less attention focused on how that happens. But I felt like it's just so critical, and it's so critical that it happened now. And so that felt important to me to carry forward. But yeah, I mean, in general, I think it's sort of thinking about, I think I'm just sort of balancing, like, this is my value, these are the goals, this is sort of the overall aim, and what does that mean for what I can do today and tomorrow in my role and in this space. And so it's sort of holding it both at the same time, right? And you can't do everything, but there's lots of very specific things that we can do right now that will have real impact on the ground, and that's the opportunity for this. Was there another question in there that I never got to?
Great, thank you.
Thanks for the talk. I really appreciated it. So DOT is often known, I'll put it delicately, as an agency with a lot of inertia. They're very, very slow to do things. You went in from the White House, which is a place that moves very, very, very fast. How do you, and the issue of climate change is so critical. We don't have time. How do you see the culture at DOT changing, or how do you affect change to the culture at DOT to make them recognize that they are actually part of a key piece in the climate change puzzle, and that they need to be doing things, they need to be making some change, rather than just kind of going out with the status quo?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it is right that federal agencies are beholden to their missions, and there's lots of inertia about how things have been done previously. And I guess I would first say, I mean, there's lots of very good reasons that that's like that, and there's lots of ways that's often protective. Scientific integrity is also in my portfolio, and so having these big agencies that have a lot of policies and processes can often, protect the work in situations where there might be someone who's looking to disrupt it. And so there's really there's sort of good reasons it's like that. So I thought about that too, and when I was in the White House, and sometimes it's very hard to get something done from the White House, and when you're trying to work with agencies and get them to do things, and I often thought, well, it's actually very good that they're not just willing to do what I say as a White House employee, because you want those safeguards in place to really think about the long term and what is in the public interest. And so first I'd sort of give that context to it, but I think specifically with respect to transportation and climate at DOT, I think there is the opportunity to advance how climate is considered and centered in decision making in different parts of the department, because there's sort of the inertia effect that you mentioned, and often it's just a lot too of just silos and people operating within their different spaces, and so often you can do a lot just in building connections between those spaces, making different groups and different decision points aware of each other, making sure that we're bridging that technical side, science side with the policy decisions. And so that's a lot of the work that I'm really focused on now, is sort of what do people need to consider climate and the kinds of decisions they make, where are the different opportunities at the different levels, and now that we have a lot of this high level direction and investment, that creates more opportunity to do it in more places. And so now there is a lot of effort to advance climate related thinking in different parts of the department, and I would argue too it extends to beyond US DOT, but also state DOTs and NPOs, communities that often too don't necessarily, they're not going to necessarily have a climate scientist on staff in metropolitan planning organizations. And so what kinds of tools and resources do they need to better consider this? How can we really make it easier for people to consider climate and advance that work in different places? And so that's something I'm very actively thinking about and working on.
Thanks for the talk. The other big challenge, one of the big challenges with decarbonizing the transport sector is dealing with changes at so many scales across jurisdictions as well. Thinking about, if you just think about transit, the jurisdiction at the city level, or municipal level, for bus transit, it could be at the state level. As you look at regional transport, and then if you're talking about massive change in increasing public funding at the bigger scale, you require federal funding. And that too across so many different states. So I'm just thinking about how the OST thinking about coordination or planning across these various scales to think about coordinated decarbonization, finding solutions that are optimal and also taking into account constraints at these different levels.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's one of the central challenges with transportation. There's some issues that are there's just a lot more sort of federal control over it, right? You could sort of guide things and that shapes it for the whole country. But with transportation, right, it's very distributed. We have a lot of the decisions are made at the state and local level. And when it comes to decarbonization, that presents a lot of challenges in how you implement things, because we often don't have the lever at DOT, at US DOT, of saying, this is the way it's going to be done, and please do it this way. 50 states, we're not really able to do that. And so, and there's good reasons, you sort of want local control on a lot of these things. And so, yeah, it's a big challenge on that coordination. That's one of the reasons that we, with the transportation decarbonization blueprint, that we wanted to make sure it wasn't just a DOT thing. It was this conglomeration between Department of Energy, DOT, HUD, and EPA, because it is something where you want that coordination, and we want to see, okay, what is the housing piece of this? How can we do the land use and the transportation thinking at the same time? We coordinate with EPA, given that they have different levers of change possible, and Department of Energy as well, since they're providing all the technical work in this space as well. And so there's really this opportunity to work together. So I think that's something that yeah, we can continue to advance. And there's a couple efforts on that front. I might mention, one I think is US DOT, of course, has a role in working with state and local communities and thinking about how to make sure they're learning from each other and working together and advancing that work. And I'd say too, it also just scales up to the international scale too, where we've been working with Canada on a electrification corridor to make sure that there's alignment there and that there's coordination in terms of accessibility and charging stations, different places. So yeah, I think that a lot of that is just, it's underway now as we build out charging infrastructure, as we think about getting dollars out the door on all of these programs. And yeah, I think we'll learn a lot about where the coordination is needed, but ongoing effort.
We have a question online. It says, thank you for your presentation. I have two questions. First, I use US DOT roadway inventory data to study traffic related air pollution. I noticed that community roads are often not labeled as US DOT regulated roads. You mentioned some plans about changing community to be more climate friendly. Could you talk about more specific acts that US DOT want to do with community and what there are those non-US DOT roads?
Oh yeah. So this is part of that distributed challenge, right? That roads are owned by different jurisdictions, and that also just makes it challenging. And I don't know if people may have had personal experiences with this. I learned a ton about this because I wanted to get a bus shelter at our local bus stop, and it's up a county line. So I learned a lot about the town versus the county versus the other county and the state, and who controls whether or not there's a bus stop there. And so, you know, we see this sort of like complicated matrix of transportation infrastructure. It's just the way that it is in the US. And I think, yeah, I think there is a lot of opportunity there on the data side. So I think on that, I'd say I think that there is this rich opportunity right now, given the explosion of different kinds of data that we have when it comes to transportation and environmental issues specifically. And so, you know, we've seen in recent years, there's sort of an explosion of low-cost sensors, environmental monitoring. NASA launched Tempo this year, which was a satellite that's going to have or is starting to give us unprecedented levels of air quality data that we've never had before. And every day it scans the whole country. And so we get this, we're getting like all these new data sets and opportunities. And so I think that's also an important role that it sounds like that questioner and maybe you all can play in academic settings is, you know, how should we be leveraging all of this data and making sure that it is going into decisions, because I think there's just such an opportunity to do more of that now as we're sort of starting to learn about where all these new tools can be applied in different spaces. And so on transportation, I think that's a really big piece of it. So first, I feel like that request for information we have out on the environmental justice data piece, because this is the kind of specific sort of challenge we're looking for on that of, you know, where are the opportunities where we need to be doing better on this. So it sounds like maybe that issue sounds right for us to draw to our attention and thinking about the different who owns the road and what consequences does that have for data gaps. So I think that's a big opportunity. And then, you know, I think, yeah, there's just a lot more we could be doing in this space. So I hope we'll think about that more. I wrote something earlier this year in environmental health perspectives on this topic and thinking about how to really leverage technology and this new onset of data specifically for air quality and environmental justice policy decisions. So I think I'm just agreeing with the questioner that there's opportunity there.
Awesome. We're out of time for questions. Can we give Gretchen Goldman another round of applause, please? As always, send you a link to the hours. Thank you for listening. Great job. Yeah.